Hey, welcome back to AFSOC Unfiltered. I'm Lieutenant General Gen Slife, and I'm joined, as usual, by my colleague, Lieutenant Colonel Myron Chivas. Myron, we've had a lot of conversations here over the last several weeks as we have gotten together to talk through issues of race in the Air Force and in society. You know, one of the things that has kind of stood out to me as we've had this conversation is, you know, we have joked about it. You've said it. I've said it. You feel like you have to qualify your statements on behalf of. I'm not speaking on behalf of all black people. Here when I say this and so forth. That brings up kind of an interesting phenomenon, which is, have you ever heard of, besides me when we're joking about it, I mean, have you ever heard a white person say, hey, I don't speak on behalf of all white people here on this?
I've never heard it. I've absolutely never heard it. And I joked about how black people don't like break white people down into like segments. We're just it's white people. So when a white person talks, it's not, are you Irish or are you whatever sect or piece of the white. Right. So I've never heard, I'm speaking for all Jewish, not speaking for all Jewish people or Irish people. No, I've never heard that before. And I think, well, I don't even want to go there. So I'm going to ask you a question, and it is, have you ever felt like you represented more than just you? Like, have you ever want to quantify, like, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Air Force or anything like that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So this is a theory. I don't know if it's right. This is kind of the theory that I operate under. I think that most of us have what I call, and people have pushed back on this before, but I think this is kind of the way I feel. I think people have an onion of identities that they're carrying around with them, right? So your onion of identity, there are lots of different layers to who Myron Chivas is. Are you a pilot? Well, yeah, you're a pilot. Are you an Air Force officer? Yeah, you're an Air Force officer. Are you a husband? Yeah, you're a husband. Are you a father? Yeah. Are you a black man? Yes, you are. Are you heterosexual? Yes, you are. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways that, a bunch of different identities that we could put on Myron Chivas, right? And I'm walking around with my own onion of identities, these various layers of things. And some of the layers of my onion are really central to myself, my assessment of myself, right? And some of them are just like things like, yeah, that accurately describes me, but I'm not particularly emotional about it. I mean, whatever. But what I've noticed is that when you are in I shouldn't say you, when I am in a environment where one of my layers of my onion, and particularly the ones closer to the center, find me in a minority, I get really sensitive to that. And when I'm in an environment where those layers are not in a minority, even the ones closest to the center, I'm not particularly sensitive to it, and it doesn't immediately come to my mind that that's who I am, right? So let me give you an example. So I've served in a lot of joint organizations over time. When I am in the AFSOC headquarters, when I'm surrounded by airmen, when I come, to do a unit visit and I'm surrounded by airmen, feeling like, I'm not I'm not consciously aware of the fact that I'm in the Air Force. And I don't feel like, hey man, everything I do, I have to represent the Air Force here today. Now clearly, everything I do represents the Air Force, but I mean, I'm not walking around feeling it, when I'm, in your squadron or whatever. I mean, it doesn't come to my mind that way. But when I'm in a joint environment where it's all people from other services and I'm the only airman in the room, I'm pretty aware of the fact that I'm the airman here and I need to not embarrass the Air Force and I need to faithfully represent the Air Force in this joint environment. That's a thing, right? And I become sensitive to perceived slights, right? And so let me give you an example. When I'm in an Air Force setting and somebody were to send me an email that's like LTG Slife, I don't think anything of it. It's not a big deal to me. When I'm in a joint environment and somebody in the Army sends me an email that says LTG Slife, my reaction is to kind of stick my jaw out and go, hey man, I'm not an LTG Slife. I'm a capital L, small t, space, capital G, small e, small n Slife. I didn't join the Army, I joined the Air Force. So treat me like I'm in the Air Force, right? But I'm only sensitive about that thing when I'm in an environment where I'm like, in the minority, right? I first noticed this when I went to senior developmental education. When I went to, I was supposed to go to War College, and I got diverted at a late stage, and I was sent to be a Secretary of Defense corporate fellow. So what's that? Well, you go spend a year as working at a reasonably high level in a Fortune 500 company somewhere. And so as a Air Force colonel, I went and spent a year at Microsoft. And part of that experience at Microsoft, I found myself in rooms where I was the only man in a meeting. It was all women and me. And I don't normally walk around thinking about being a man. I don't walk into a room and look around and go, oh yeah, good. Got some other men here to, cover my six. I'm not consciously aware of being a man. Right up until the point when I'm the only man in the room. And then I'm like, wow, this is a different experience. Because for me, I've been the majority in virtually every room I've ever been in my career. And so I don't think about these identities. It just doesn't come to the forefront of my mind. And so as a habit, because I've always been the majority in these rooms, I generally don't feel like I need to preface everything by, hey, I'm not speaking on behalf of all men or on behalf of all Air Force people or on behalf of all white people. I don't ever feel like I have to do that. I just get to be me, right? And so when I succeed or fail, it's not, when something good happens to me, I don't think there's a bunch of people sitting around going, right on, another success for men. I don't think anybody thinks that. I just get to be me. And, that's something that I've become aware of, that not everybody has that experience. If you fail as a squadron commander, what happens?
It's the black squadron commander from X and X base, and with the percentages of how many there are and how many have failed. And to be quite honest, there's very few of us in the Air Force, so a lot of black airmen know who I am. Just like I know a lot of lieutenants, black lieutenants, because there's just not many. So I think your experience at Microsoft has been my experience my entire Air Force career. Where something that's at my core is the fact that I'm black, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Everyone knows I'm in the room when I'm in the room. I don't blend in, and that's just not my perception of it. It's the perception you had when you're the guy in the room,
But that was my perception, right? And so I would challenge you. This is a conversation. You and I haven't had this conversation about 5 or 6 years, but I remember, I could walk you to the spot where we had it. We were in the food court on the first floor of the Pentagon, having a similar conversation. And, so when I was in that room with all those women, I was highly aware of the fact that I was different than them. I'm not sure they were. I'm not sure that they were like, oh, hey, we better be careful what we say because there's a man in here. I don't think they're. And so do you, when you say, when you're in a room, everybody knows you're there. Well, it's clear that you know you're there. But do you think everybody's, sitting around thinking, hey, man, the black dude's here. We got to, kind of watch what we say.
And this is just a culmination of life experiences, right? So we're sitting around pilot training and it's token. It's like, okay, so everyone here has identified the black guys in the room, right? It wasn't Myron Chivas saying, call me token because I'm the black guys in the room. It wasn't me expressing the fact that I was there. It was everyone identifying that I was there, or when I hear a story where someone's like, oh yeah, I was trying to explain you where you didn't know you were. So when I was like, the black guy, the black guy, oh yeah, I don't know his name, but yeah, he was, yeah, that guy. So it isn't just my perspective that people know who I am, or people know that I'm there, not know who I am, but they recognize that a black guy was there, because there's been many times you can talk about the black guy and be like, oh yeah, I know that guy. Or I get an email like, oh yeah, such and such was talking to you. And I was like, I heard the story, you didn't remember my name. So somewhat similar to the race card thing, like you don't want to say that's what it is because you don't know, but there's enough signs and enough similarities with some of your peers to where it starts to add up. And then so when a buddy of mine and I enter a room, we're the only two black guys, we look at each other and we're like, yep, we're here. I see you. Stand over there. I'll stand over here. So it doesn't look like we're like coming together to come up with a coup or something like that. I'm being somewhat funny, but we recognize we're there. So maybe you were the only one that recognized you're the guy there, but I think there's a chance that if there's something that you said, they could refer to the guy in the room.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure that if they didn't know who I was or what, it would be easy to identify me that way in that room. But, this is one of those where, this exchange as we've had it over the years, I take your word for it because I trust you and I know you, but I don't see it. I remember one time you said to me, I would love to be a fly on the wall in a room of in a room of white generals just to hear what the conversation was like. Do you remember that when we had that conversation?
Yep.
Yeah. And it's just such a foreign observation to me because I remember thinking, well, if you're waiting for the topic of race to come up, you're probably going to be waiting a while. It's, in my experience, it's just not, that's not what we sit around and talk about, unless it's a topical thing like, right now in, June of 2020, it's a topical thing, and so it gets a lot of discussion. But on a, when it's not in the news or when it's not on, somebody, it doesn't come up.
So,
like it wouldn't come up, to you being in that room, when you are sitting in a room with me, I'm like, okay, there's a black guy here. I got, make sure. It just doesn't cross my mind. And if you and another black guy are in the room, I'm not sitting there thinking, hey, you guys better make sure you don't sit together, because then somebody might draw some kind of conclusion. But it just doesn't cross my mind. But it crosses your mind.
So recently, congratulations to Chief Master Sergeant, soon to be Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Bass. Is it Bass or Base? I believe it's Bass. And now, now that we have this social media thing, and I understand that the worst people have an opportunity to speak, and be loud. But when she was announced as the next Chief Master Sergeant, this isn't my perspective, right? And this isn't just the worst of people on social media. There were folks that wanted to point to, right now we need a woman, we need something different. And that frustrated me. Because as you look through her bio, you're like, man, ALS DG, so when she entered the Air Force, NCO Academy DG, Senior NCO Academy DG, she's done everything and was the best at all of it. But it's the woman thing, and people are and I mean, it's important because she's the first. It's amazing because it's the first, and it's about time, and you hear all those things, and I can't speak for all the women in the world, but some of the ones that I was talking to are just so excited and proud to see that there's a woman finally reaching that level. But there were some distractions, like people wanted to put an asterisk next to her name because right now we need that person, right? So while I want to believe people aren't having that conversation, I'm watching the conversation. Right now we have the first female wing commander at Herbert Field, Colonel Skirmorhorn. I've watched and known her forever. I've watched her when she was the vice wing commander at Andrews. I know squadron commanders that worked with and for her while she was there. Nothing but amazing things. You look through her record, it's great. If I were to say people didn't look at when she was announced, they're like, because we had to have a woman, I'd be disingenuous, because there were people that said it. There were people that said it in front of me, just because most likely because I'm not a woman, right? And there wasn't a woman around when it was said. And I worked for a boss. He was gay, and he worked in the Air Force when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a thing, right? So he was in the closet most of his career, and then boom, it's repealed, and he comes out and tells everyone that he's gay. And he relayed this story to me because he said there was a time in the Air Force where in the room people would make comments about gays, and this is. He's working at senior levels, right? He's I mean, he ended up doing very, very well for himself in the military. And, he said, the moment that I came out as gay, I never heard those jokes again. The difference between me and you, Myron, is you're never in the closet, right? And so what I heard from him was, I've heard comments about black people, and when there weren't any black people in the room. And so again, this isn't, I wish it were just my perspective. Like I just was like, oh man, I'm always looking over my shoulder. But I've had enough people tell me to look over my shoulder that I'm starting to believe that there's issues there. And many of our airmen have had similar experiences. So the fact that you led this conversation, you're one of the first to come out, and people know where you are on this, might be why when you're in the room, there aren't many conversations about other folks. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, that, like I say, this is going back to our first episode. We talked about the cube. All I can see is my green triangle on this, and the fact that you're telling me there's a yellow square that I'm just not seeing because it's not my experience, and for whatever reason. Whether it's because people are, change their behavior around me, or whether I've just, been fortunate in the rooms that I've been, whatever it is, or maybe I blocked it out, or maybe I didn't realize that, hey, this is actually a conversation about race, and, we just, we're calling it something else, or we're talking about it in indirect ways, or what. Maybe I've just been too naive to see it. But for whatever reason, all I see is the green triangle. But I know you well enough to know that, I can trust you. And when you tell me there's a yellow square you're just not seeing, okay, there's a yellow square. I believe it. I haven't experienced it. I can't see it from where I sit, but it's there. Yeah, that, The other thing that this conversation kind of leads to is this idea that when I talk about diversity and inclusion, I talk about why diversity is powerful for the organization, why it's good for mission, why we need to embrace diversity. A lot of times people will come around to the idea, so actually what you're saying is it's all about diversity of thought, right? And it's like, just please tell me it's all about diversity of thought. And, I've kind of come to the conclusion that partially it's about different perspectives and that kind of stuff, but it's more than diversity of thought. It's actually visual diversity, right? I mean, you talked about the first woman that's a wing commander here at Hurlburt as of about 3 weeks ago or whatever it is. She's always been good, and there have always been talented women. I shouldn't say always. There have for years there have been talented women in AFSOC. But, for those women to be able to look up and say, hey, that is possible for me, that means something. It's not just diversity of thought. She represents something. General Brown becoming the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. I mean, when I look at General Brown, I see a, capable, thoughtful, leader that I enjoy serving with. I've been around General Brown for a number of years in different environments. He's going to be a great Chief of Staff. But to me, he doesn't necessarily represent something, other than he's going to be a really good Chief of Staff. To you, he may represent something different than what he represents to me.
So I remember that the first time someone told me, if you believe it, if you dream it, you can be it, right? I think I was like in 6th or 7th grade, because where I'm from is if you can see it, you can be it. And that nuance is powerful. And, I know engineers that growing up, like I saw engineers on TV that were black, I saw people in certain occupations, and by seeing people that look like me, those look like opportunities that I could achieve. And then one day there was an astronaut, and I was like, oh, we do that? Maybe I'll look into that. And so when you can see people doing things that look like you, it makes you think maybe I can do that. Because the military has had a mixed history with a lot of things. We've led in diversity, we've led in integration, we've led in, but there was a time, where we were just like where society was. And some of that history hasn't fallen off. Like my dad, my uncle, when he was in the Air Force, he was an interracial relationship, right? And at the time, there were many states that didn't legalize it. So he spent most of his military career overseas. He was allowed in the Air Force, but he spent it overseas. And so I have my uncle that's telling me about all the places that he couldn't PCS to because of his marriage, right? This is my living uncle still today. And what that looked like and what opportunities were available to him. Well, I can't go be that chief because I can't go to that state, or I can't go do this thing because I can't do that. And so there, you can be successful, but you can only be this successful because of these things that you've never seen anyone achieve. So yes, diversity of thought is important. It's very, very important, especially to the mission. The picture itself, like seeing General Brown, the first black Chief of Staff of the Air Force, it puts a smile on my face, because I met Major General Brown and I was blown away and impressed by the things that he had to say, not just because he was a general, but because he was extremely impressive, but also to know that how crazy this is, and that could be a thing. Like if if I work really, really hard, that could really be a thing.
Now, come on.
Well, I mean, I'm not trying to reach that far. I'm not trying to reach that far. But for my kids and stuff, I mean, like, I'm glad I made it through command. You know, I'm
You absolutely could be General Brown. You absolutely could. But you could before General Brown. So how much of that is, you know, you just didn't see it in yourself?
When I wasn't picked as the representative for my squadron to be your exec, I could have been your exec. Someone else didn't see it in me. Right? The paperwork on my OPRs all said that I could be that guy. But for some reason, all right, yeah, he's a great, yeah, that makes sense. I just didn't see it. Right? So yeah, I could have done it. And I did do it. But the person that was going to open the doors for me just didn't see it in me. And so I can't disconnect that event in my life from others. I'd be naive. And so I'll continue to punch through and try and open up, make people feel comfortable, and see me in positions that you typically haven't seen someone like me in. And now General Brown, we've seen someone in it, and now it might make sense to see me in it. Not just to me, but the people that will make the decisions to help me get there. And so I think when you talk about diversity, yeah, let's just say it. Sometimes seeing somebody in the seat, even those diversity of thought and stuff, it's significant. It really is.
Yeah. All right. I think, Myron, is there anything that we haven't touched on over the last 7, I think, episodes that is worth diving into before we wrap this thing up?
When in your life, like at what point did you really start digging into this? Like, when did you start feeling comfortable having this conversation and leading the conversation about diversity and inclusion? I mean, were you born with it? Were you raised with it through your life? Were you hanging around with, you know, a bunch of diverse people growing up? Because I'm familiar with your background and where you're from.
When did I become comfortable with it? I'll let you know when it happens. I'll let you know. I didn't grow up with it. I grew up in a, you know, I don't remember if we talked about this, but you know, I grew up in a house with a parent who was bigoted. My dad grew up in Chicago during the Depression, and you know, I didn't grow up in Chicago, but you know, when we went back, my dad would, as we drove around his old neighborhoods and stuff, he would, by the block, he would say, this is where the Italians live, this is where the Irish were, this is where the Jews were, this is where the Poles were. You know, I mean, he would go you know, there was a stereotype for every ethnicity. And so you were joking earlier about, you know, I don't know, you know, Irish, whatever. I mean, you're just white to me. Not to my dad. You know, my dad had a stereotype for every person. And they were all negative, you know, they were all negative. But certainly some of that was towards African Americans. And so I grew up with this, you know, with bigotry in, you know, as part of my upbringing. There weren't any black kids in my high school. I went to college, there weren't any black kids in my class. I went to my first, you know, assignment. There was nothing but white people. Went to my second assignment. There was, I think, 2 black people in my first assignment in AFSOC. You know, out of, you know, several hundred people in the squadron. I think there were 2 black. So I have not grown up with this, and it wasn't until I did that corporate experience at Microsoft where I was in a room where for the first time in my life I was not the majority with, in this case it was women. And I realized, man, the conversations in this room are really different than the conversations in most rooms that I've been in. And they're not necessarily better or worse or whatever, but they're different. And that then kind of got me started thinking. That was 2006. That got me thinking about, the value of different ways of thinking and the strength of diversity and so forth. And I mean, that was 2006. It took me until about 2010 of kind of working through what does this mean for the Air Force? Because I had always felt like the Air Force was a leader in diversity. I mean, the military is a leader in integration. And hey man, like African American History Month, it's a thing for us. I mean, clearly we've got this all figured out, right? I mean, we've dedicated a month to it. I mean, what more do you want? And so, I mean, I thought, oh yeah, we're good. And what I realized in that experience in corporate America is, in corporate America, they hire for diversity because it makes more money. It makes them it improves the bottom line. And so the thing that I thought about for several years was, so what's the equivalent of the bottom line in the Air Force? I mean, we're not a money-making organization. And the conclusion I came to was, it's mission effectiveness. And so how does diversity make us more mission effective was the question. And it took me about 4 years before it was like 2010 before I was even willing to, try this conversation out in public. And it was extraordinarily uncomfortable because, I'm just, I'm not the normal deliverer of a message about diversity, right? 10 years ago, I certainly wasn't. And so it took me a while to get at least comfortable enough to start talking about diversity as a mission imperative and not as a social justice imperative, although it is clearly that too. But in the Air Force, our bottom line is the mission. And so, the question you and I have talked about before is, so you're telling me that, if you got one black guy and one woman and one Jewish person and one, homosexual and one, if you got that, then you're good and you're going to be more mission effective. No, that's not the point. The point is that you may reach the same decision if I have a very homogeneous organization versus a very diverse we may make the same decision at the end of the day, but it will be a much better informed decision when you have a diverse cohort of people, because you will get different perspectives regardless of where they come from. I mean, your life is just different than my life, but so is everybody's. No two people live the same life, but there are perspectives to be gained. A woman's perspective, women view a lot of problems differently than men do and see things that men don't see. And so I think diversity makes us a better organization because we get more perspectives on the problem we're trying to solve, the situation we're trying to deal with. I mean, I could go on, you've heard me go on a rant about this. At the points where the Air Force has had the biggest organizational catastrophes have always occurred at the point where the Air Force has become most homogenous at the top. So I believe that diversity makes us a better organization. But I've been talking about this for 10 years, and I'm still not completely comfortable with it, right? I'm still not completely comfortable because, like the conversation we had in the last episode about the N-word, there are still boundaries out there that I'm not real sure exactly where the boundary. I mean, can I say the N-word as long as I'm not calling somebody the N-word? I mean, can I, in an academic kind of environment, can I even utter those letters together in one word or not? These are boundaries that I'm still I'm not sure. And so I'm a work in progress. I'm certainly not finished.
And I'm learning, and I'm working also, and I understand that there's so few black airmen in the Air Force that I will have this conversation quite often, and I welcome those conversations, and I appreciate all my friends that have reached out to continue these conversations, and yes, it's heavy, and yes, it's hard, and yes, it's emotional every single time I have that conversation. No, I don't respond welcoming all of the time, but I feel like it'd be selfish if I didn't. It'd be selfish for me, it'd be selfish for future airmen, it'd be selfish for the airmen that I serve with. So I welcome those conversations, I appreciate them, and I hope airmen out in AFSOC welcome that conversation as well.
Yeah, I know they do. I'm hearing about it already. All right. Well, thanks, Myron. Thanks for going through the last several weeks as we've recorded these conversations. You know, I will come back in the next episode and wrap things up, kind of put a bow on this conversation and leave it to our airmen to carry it forward. But as always, I appreciate you. I'm learning from you. I'm becoming a better version of myself for having you in my life. Thanks. All right. Thanks for joining us for AFSOC Unfiltered.